October 24th, 1946, Prague, Czechoslovakia. A cold autumn morning breaks over Pankrak prison as guards prepare the gallows for one of Nazi Germany's highest-ranking war criminals. The man they're about to execute controlled a force of nearly 500,000 police officers who murdered over 2 million people across occupied Europe. His name was Kurt Daluege, and most people have never heard of him. That's about to change. Kurt Daluege was born September 15, 1897, in the Kreuzberg district of Berlin to a Prussian civil servant family. His father worked as a minor government official. His mother managed their modest household. Young Kurt grew up in the rigid, militaristic culture of Imperial Germany, where discipline, hierarchy, and obedience were considered the highest virtues. He attended local schools, performed adequately but not exceptionally, and seemed destined for an unremarkable middle-class existence. Then came August 1914, and everything changed. World War I erupted across Europe. 17-year-old Daluege, swept up in patriotic fervor, like millions of German youth, enlisted in the Imperial German Army. He served on the Western Front, witnessing the industrial-scale slaughter that defined modern warfare. Machine guns, artillery barrages, poison gas, trench warfare. He was wounded twice, received the Iron Cross Second Class for bravery under fire, and emerged from the war physically intact but psychologically transformed. The war ended in Germany's humiliating defeat. The Kaiser abdicated, and the Weimar Republic was born from chaos and national shame. Daluege, like countless demobilized soldiers, found himself adrift in the turbulent Weimar years. Hyperinflation destroyed savings, political violence erupted in the streets, communist and fascist paramilitaries battled openly, Germany's economy collapsed. Its pride shattered, its future uncertain. Into this void stepped the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, led by a former corporal named Adolf Hitler. In 1922, 25-year-old Daluege joined the Nazi Party, receiving membership number 31,981. He wasn't attracted by sophisticated political theory. The Nazis offered something simpler and more seductive: explanations for Germany's suffering, scapegoats to blame, and promises of restored greatness. Jews, communists, and foreign enemies had stabbed Germany in the back. The Nazis would make Germany powerful again. Daluege proved himself a capable organizer and absolutely loyal to Hitler. In 1926, he joined the SS, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's elite paramilitary guard, receiving SS number 1100. While others debated ideology, Daluege focused on building organizational structures and recruiting members. He helped establish the SS in Berlin, expanding it from a small bodyguard unit into a significant force. His administrative talents caught the attention of Heinrich Himmler, who would soon become Reichsführer SS and architect of the Holocaust. January 30th, 1933, Hitler seized power as Chancellor of Germany. Within months, the Nazis dismantled German democracy, outlawed opposition parties, and began constructing their totalitarian state. Daluege's career accelerated dramatically. In March 1933, he became a member of the Prussian State Council. In June 1933, he was appointed chief of the Prussian police. By 1936, he commanded the Ordnungspolizei, the Order Police, a force that would grow to 500,000 uniformed officers. The Ordnungspolizei wasn't your ordinary police force. Under Daluege's command, they became instruments of genocide. These weren't SS fanatics in death's head uniforms. These were regular policemen, many middle-aged family men, transformed into mass murderers through Nazi indoctrination and Daluege's organizational structure. Here's what most people don't understand. The Holocaust wasn't committed solely by SS death squads. Regular police battalions participated enthusiastically in mass shootings across Eastern Europe. Police Battalion 101, extensively documented by historian Christopher Browning, murdered 38,000 Jews in Poland. They weren't psychopaths or sadists. They were ordinary men who became killers under the system Daluege helped create. Daluege established the administrative framework that coordinated police participation in the final solution. His officers guarded ghettos, conducted deportation roundups, shot civilians in ditches, and staffed concentration camps. When Himmler needed men for Einsatzgruppen operations, mobile killing squads that murdered over 1 million Jews in the Soviet Union, Daluege provided trained Ordnungspolizei personnel. He attended high-level meetings where genocide was planned and discussed. He received reports detailing mass executions. He knew exactly what his forces were doing, approved their actions, and demanded greater efficiency. In internal communications, he praised officers who demonstrated particular ruthlessness in murdering civilians. By 1942, Daluege had reached the pinnacle of Nazi hierarchy. He held the rank of SS-Oberstgruppenführer, equivalent to a four-star general. He was a member of the Reichstag, Nazi Germany's rubber-stamp parliament. Heinrich Himmler considered him a trusted colleague and reliable executor of SS policy. Then came May 27, 1942, and Operation Anthropoid. Reinhard Heydrich, architect of the Holocaust, chief of the Reich Security Main Office, and acting Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia, the occupied Czech territories, was driving through Prague in his open Mercedes convertible. Two Czech resistance fighters, Jan Kubiš and Josef Gabčík, trained by British Special Operations Executive, ambushed his vehicle. A modified anti-tank mine exploded, sending shrapnel and car fragments into Heydrich's body. He died 8 days later from septicemia and infected wounds. Hitler erupted in volcanic rage. Heydrich had been one of his most capable administrators, the man who chaired the Wannsee Conference that systematized Jewish extermination. His assassination represented a massive security failure and embarrassment for the SS. Someone would pay. Not just the assassins, but the entire Czech population would learn what happened when you killed a Nazi leader. Hitler summoned Kurt Daluege to Berlin. On May 28, 1942, one day after the assassination, Hitler appointed Daluege as acting Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia, Heydrich's replacement. His orders were explicit and brutal. Exact revenge, crush, Czech resistance, terrorize the population into absolute submission. Daluege arrived in Prague on May 29th and immediately unleashed hell. The reprisals began instantly. Martial law was declared across the protectorate. Arbitrary arrest quotas were established. Czech police, working under Daluege's orders, rounded up thousands of civilians based on the flimsiest suspicions or no evidence whatsoever. Anyone with the slightest resistance connection, anyone who had criticized the Nazis, anyone denounced by neighbors or colleagues, anyone randomly selected to fill quotas, all were arrested. Summary courts operated around the clock. Trials lasted minutes. Evidence was unnecessary. Verdicts were predetermined. Execution followed immediately. In the first days after Daluege's arrival, over 1,000 Czechs were executed without meaningful legal proceedings. Their bodies were displayed publicly as warnings. Families were forbidden from mourning or removing corpses. Then Daluege ordered the operation that would define his war crimes and seal his fate, the complete annihilation of Lidice. June 9, 1942. German security police surrounded the small mining village of Lidice, located about 14 miles northwest of Prague. Population approximately 500 people. Nazi intelligence had received reports, later proven completely false, that Lidice residents had assisted Heydrich's assassins. Daluege didn't care whether the intelligence was accurate. Lidice would serve as an example, a demonstration of what happened to Czech communities suspected of resistance activity. At dawn, German forces sealed every road and path. No one could escape. They herded all inhabitants into the village square. Men and boys over age 15 were separated from women and children. The males were taken to a farm on the village outskirts. In groups of 10, they were lined against a barn wall and machine-gunned. The executions continued throughout the day. 173 males were murdered. Their bodies were thrown into mass graves. The women and children watched their husbands, fathers, and sons marched away. They heard the gunfire. They understood what was happening. All 184 women were immediately deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Most would die from starvation, disease, overwork, or in the gas chambers. The 82 children were separated. 17 deemed sufficiently Germanic-looking were sent to German families for Germanization. The remaining children were transported to Chaumno extermination camp and murdered in gas vans. But Daluege wasn't finished. He ordered Lidice physically erased from existence. German engineers demolished every building, dynamited the church, filled in the village pond, diverted the stream, and plowed the earth flat. They even dug up the cemetery and removed all gravestones. Lidice was to be eliminated so completely that future generations would forget it ever existed. The destruction of Lidice shocked the world. Allied governments publicized the massacre extensively. The Czechoslovak government in exile distributed detailed accounts. American communities renamed streets and parks after Lidice in solidarity. The massacre became a symbol of Nazi barbarity, and Daluege was the man who ordered it. But Lidice wasn't Daluege's only atrocity as Reich's protector. Throughout summer 1942, he continued mass arrests and executions. The Czech underground was decimated. Over 5,000 Czechs were murdered during Daluege's tenure. Terror was constant, overwhelming, deliberately designed to break Czech spirit. Every week brought new executions, new deportations, new demonstrations of Nazi power. Daluege held the position until August 1943, when he suffered a severe heart attack. His health never recovered. As his medical condition deteriorated, he was given ceremonial positions with minimal responsibilities. By 1945, he was physically incapacitated, but his crimes hadn't been forgotten. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Nazi regime collapsed. Its leaders scattered, hiding or fleeing. Some committed suicide, others disappeared into obscurity. Daluege attempted neither. Too ill to run, too prominent to hide, he remained in Germany as Allied forces swept across the country. On May 26, 1945, British forces arrested him without resistance. The Allied powers immediately recognized Daluege's significance. He wasn't just another SS officer. He had commanded 500,000 police, participated in Holocaust planning, and ordered the Lidice massacre. The Czechoslovak government formally requested his extradition to stand trial for war crimes committed on Czech soil. April 1946. Daluege was transferred to Czech custody and transported to Pankrak prison in Prague. The same city where he had unleashed terror 4 years earlier would now judge him. Czech authorities charged him with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and mass murder. The trial was scheduled for October 1946, giving prosecutors 4 months to compile evidence. They didn't need long. The evidence was overwhelming. The Extraordinary People's Court in Prague convened on October 16, 1946. Presiding Judge Dr. František Slama led a panel of professional judges and lay assessors. The prosecution presented a massive case documenting Daluege's crimes in meticulous detail. German documents captured after the war provided the paper trail. Orders bearing Daluege's signature authorized mass executions, deportations, and the destruction of Lidice. His administrative records showed he personally approved death lists. Survivor testimonies formed the emotional core of the prosecution. Czech witnesses described watching German police murder their family members. Lidice survivors testified about the day their village was annihilated. They described hearing the machine gun fire that killed their husbands and fathers. They testified about children ripped from their arms and sent to gas chambers. Women who survived Ravensbrück concentration camp described conditions that killed dozens of Lidice prisoners. Daluege sat through the proceedings in deteriorating health. At 49 years old, he looked much older, his face pale and drawn, his body weakened by his heart condition. He wore civilian clothes, stripped of his SS uniform and insignia. Unlike many Nazi defendants who shouted defiance or claimed ignorance, Daluege adopted a different strategy. He admitted his actions but denied criminal intent. Yes, he had ordered reprisals. Yes, he had signed execution orders. Yes, he had destroyed Lidice, but he claimed he was following orders from Hitler and Himmler. He insisted he was a soldier obeying legitimate commands from his superiors. He characterized the massacres as military necessity in response to Heydrich's assassination. He never expressed remorse. He never apologized. He maintained he had done his duty as a German officer. The defense argued Daluege's poor health made execution inappropriate. They presented medical evidence showing his severe heart disease. They suggested imprisonment would be adequate punishment given his likely short remaining lifespan. They portrayed him as a bureaucrat who implemented policies rather than a hands-on killer. None of it worked. The prosecution demolished every defense argument. International law, even in 1942, prohibited collective punishment of civilians. The Hague Conventions, which Germany had signed, explicitly forbade reprisals against non-combatants. Superior orders provided no defense for manifestly illegal commands. Murdering women and children was never legitimate military action. Daluege wasn't a mindless functionary. He held immense authority and exercised it enthusiastically to commit atrocities. October 23, 1946, verdict day. The courtroom packed with spectators, many of them survivors of Nazi occupation or families of victims. Judge Slama read the verdict. On all charges, guilty. Kurt Daluege was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The sentence? Death by hanging. The court found that Daluege had personally ordered and supervised the murder of thousands of Czech civilians. His responsibility for the Lidice massacre was absolute and undeniable. His administrative position made him responsible for all crimes committed by the Ordnungspolizei in the Protectorate. His claims of following orders were rejected as legally insufficient and morally bankrupt. The judges determined that execution was the only appropriate punishment for such enormous criminality. Daluege showed no visible reaction to the sentence. He was escorted back to his cell in Prague prison. Under Czech law, he had the right to appeal, but everyone knew the outcome was certain. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crimes too extensive, the verdict too just. His lawyers filed the required appeals, which were rejected within days. The execution date was set, October 24, 1946. Daluege spent his final night writing letters to his wife and family. He requested a Protestant minister who visited and prayed with him. Prison records indicate he ate dinner but left most of it untouched. He slept fitfully. Guards checked his cell every 30 minutes to prevent suicide attempts. The Czech government wanted him alive for his execution, to face justice publicly. October 24, 1946, dawn. Guards entered Daluege's cell at 5 a.m. They informed him his execution would proceed in 1 hour. He was given breakfast, which he declined. The Protestant minister returned for final prayers. Daluege dressed in the same civilian clothes he had worn during trial. At 5:45 a.m., guards bound his hands behind his back and led him from his cell. The execution would take place in Prague prison's courtyard, the same location where the Nazis had executed hundreds of Czech resistance fighters during the occupation. It was deliberately chosen, a symbolic circle of justice. A wooden gallows had been constructed, simple but functional. No elaborate setup, just a platform, a crossbeam, and a rope. Approximately 50 official witnesses assembled. Government officials, prosecutors, judges, journalists, and most significantly, survivors of Daluege's crimes. Among the witnesses were several Lidice survivors who had endured Ravensbrück and lived to see this day. Czech authorities had decided against a massive public execution like the Stutthof guards received. This would be witnessed but not turned into a spectacle. 6 a.m. guards escorted Kurt Daluege across the courtyard toward the gallows. Prison records describe him walking slowly but without assistance. His deteriorated physical condition evident, his face remained expressionless. If he felt fear or regret, he showed none. The Protestant minister walked beside him, reciting prayers Daluege appeared not to hear. The executioner, a professional hangman hired by Czech authorities, stood waiting on the gallows platform. Czech law mandated humane execution methods even for the worst criminals. The technique would be standard drop hanging, calculated to break the neck instantly and cause rapid unconsciousness, a far more merciful death than Daluege had granted his thousands of victims. At the foot of the gallows, officials read the formal execution warrant aloud. The document recounted Daluege's crimes, the court's verdict, and the legal authority for his execution. The reading took approximately 3 minutes. Daluege listened without reaction, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the prison walls. When the reading concluded, officials asked if Daluege wished to make a final statement. He declined, speaking only 4 words in German, "I have nothing to say." Those would be his last words. No confession, no apology, no acknowledgement of the immense suffering he had caused. Just silence. Guards guided him up the wooden steps to the gallows platform. His heart condition made climbing difficult, and guards had to support him. Once on the platform, they positioned him over the trap door. The executioner placed a white hood over Daluege's head, obscuring his face. The noose was positioned around his neck, the knot placed precisely behind his left ear for maximum efficiency. At 6:04 a.m., the executioner pulled the lever. The trapdoor opened. Kurt Daluege dropped through. The rope snapped taut. Contemporary accounts indicate the execution was performed correctly, his neck breaking immediately from the calculated drop distance. His body convulsed briefly, involuntary muscle reactions, then went still. The prison physician waited the required time period, then climbed a ladder to check for pulse and respiration. At 6:17 a.m., 13 minutes after the trap opened, Kurt Daluege was officially pronounced dead. His body was left hanging for the required period to ensure death, then lowered and removed to the prison morgue. Under Czech law, his body was released to his family for burial. Unlike many executed Nazis whose bodies were cremated and ashes scattered to prevent grave sites becoming neo-Nazi shrines, Daluege was buried in a family plot in Berlin. His grave remains unmarked, a deliberate decision by his family to avoid attention. The execution of Kurt Daluege closed one chapter in the long process of post-war justice, but the reverberations of his crimes continued for decades. The Lidice massacre remained burned into Czech national consciousness. In 1947, the Czech government decided to rebuild Lidice as a living memorial. The new village was constructed near the original site, which was preserved as a memorial park and museum. The Lidice Memorial today receives thousands of visitors annually. The names of all 340 victims are inscribed on bronze plaques. The murder site is marked with sculptures and monuments, rose gardens, planted with contributions from around the world, bloom where homes once stood. Schools bring children to learn what happened when hatred and totalitarianism go unchallenged. Daluege's execution was one of many conducted in post-war Czechoslovakia. The Czechoslovak government tried over 700 Nazi war criminals and collaborators in various courts. From 1945 to 1948, approximately 475 received death sentences, though not all were executed due to appeals, commutations, or death from natural causes before execution. The trials represented Czech determination to achieve justice for the horrors of Nazi occupation. However, Daluege's case raised questions that persist to this day. How does an ordinary man become a mass murderer? He wasn't born evil. He wasn't insane. Psychiatric evaluations found him completely rational and mentally sound. He was a product of his time and ideology, shaped by militarism, nationalism, and Nazi indoctrination into someone capable of ordering the murder of women and children without hesitation. Historian Christopher Browning's research on Ordnungspolizei Battalion 101 revealed disturbing truths about the men who served under Daluege's command. These weren't fanatical SS volunteers. They were average middle-aged men, many working class or lower middle class, drafted into police service. Yet in Poland, they participated in mass shootings of Jewish civilians. When given the option to refuse participation without punishment, most chose to continue killing. They became murderers not through coercion, but through conformity, obedience to authority, and desensitization. Daluege created and commanded the system that transformed these ordinary men into killers. His organizational genius provided the administrative structure for genocide. His orders established the framework within which mass murder became routine police work. While he didn't personally pull triggers in Lidice or ghettos across Poland, his responsibility was absolute. He was the architect of a murder machine that claimed over 2 million lives. The public hanging of Kurt Daluege serves as a reminder that justice, however delayed, can reach even the highest levels of criminal organizations. He died not as the powerful SS-Oberstgruppenführer commanding armies of police, but as a convicted war criminal executed for crimes that shocked human conscience. His death brought closure to some survivors, though it could never restore what was taken or heal the wounds left by his actions. Part 5. Legacy and Closure, 20 to 25. Approximately 900 words. The execution of Kurt Daluege represented more than individual justice. It symbolized the principle that no one, regardless of rank or position, stands above accountability for atrocities. The post-war trials established precedents that continue influencing international law today. The Nuremberg principles developed at the major war crimes trials happening simultaneously rejected superior orders as defense for manifestly criminal acts. Daluege's trial in Prague reinforced these principles in national courts. Yet the story of bringing Nazis to justice remains incomplete and frustrating. Kurt Daluege faced the gallows, but thousands of his subordinates never faced any consequences. Many Ordnungspolizei officers who participated in mass shootings returned to civilian life in post-war Germany, their crimes unacknowledged and unpunished. Some resumed police careers in West Germany. Others blended into society, their past concealed or forgotten. The reasons for this failure of justice are complex. Post-war Germany was in chaos. Records were destroyed or hidden, witnesses were scattered or dead, and prosecutorial resources were limited. The Cold War shifted priorities. West Germany, needed as an ally against Soviet communism, was allowed to rebuild without fully confronting its Nazi past. Denazification programs were inconsistent and often superficial. By the 1950s, many former Nazis had been rehabilitated and returned to positions of influence. This incomplete justice has had lasting consequences. Holocaust survivors and families of victims lived alongside unpunished perpetrators. German society delayed confronting its collective responsibility. Only in the 1960s, when a new generation began asking uncomfortable questions, did serious historical reckoning begin. The Frankfurt Auschwitz trials of 1963 to 1965 finally brought some lower-ranking perpetrators to justice, 2 decades late. Daluege's execution also raises questions about the death penalty itself. Does state-sanctioned execution of war criminals serve justice? Or does it simply continue cycles of violence? The debate remains unresolved. Supporters argue that crimes of such magnitude demand the ultimate punishment, that execution provides necessary closure for victims, and that it serves as deterrent and moral statement. Opponents contend that execution makes martyrs of criminals, that it denies society the opportunity to study and understand perpetrators, and that it reduces justice to revenge. Modern international justice has largely moved away from capital punishment. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and the Permanent International Criminal Court all prohibit death sentences, imposing maximum penalties of life imprisonment instead. This represents philosophical evolution in how humanity addresses even the worst crimes. The Czech perspective on Daluege's execution remains largely supportive. Czech historians and the general public view his hanging as appropriate punishment for Lidice and the broader repression he orchestrated. The execution provided symbolic closure, demonstrating that Nazis who terrorized Czechs during occupation would face consequences. In Czech historical memory, Daluege's death represents justice served, not revenge taken. For the latest survivors who witnessed his execution, reactions were complex. Some expressed satisfaction that he faced consequences. Others reported feeling empty, recognizing that his death couldn't restore their murdered families or erased village. One survivor later recalled, "Watching him hang didn't bring back my husband or my children. It didn't rebuild Lidice, but it showed the world that such crimes would be punished that mattered." The broader historical lesson from Daluege's life and death concerns the banality of evil, a concept philosopher Hannah Arendt would articulate years later. Daluege wasn't a monster in appearance or background. He was an ordinary man who made extraordinary choices to participate in and organize mass murder. Understanding how ordinary people become perpetrators of atrocity remains crucial for preventing future genocides. Modern genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur demonstrate that the capacity for organized mass murder didn't die with Nazi Germany. Each case involved ordinary people transformed by ideology, propaganda, and social pressure into killers. Each involved administrative structures that bureaucratize murder, making individual participation feel routine rather than criminal. The patterns Daluege exemplified repeat across decades and continents. Studying Daluege's crimes and punishment helps us understand warning signs, dehumanizing rhetoric about targeted groups, concentration of power without accountability, transformation of law enforcement into instruments of oppression, and normalization of violence against designated enemies. Recognizing these patterns in contemporary societies allows intervention before genocide develops. The Lidice Memorial continues its educational mission, teaching new generations about the consequences of hatred and totalitarianism. Over 150,000 people visit annually, many of them students. Educational programs emphasize not just what happened, but how it happened and what individuals and societies must do to prevent recurrence. The memorial stands as permanent testimony to 340 murdered innocents in a village erased from earth. Kurt Daluege has largely faded from public memory outside Czech Republic in historical specialist circles. Unlike Hitler, Himmler, Heydrich, or Eichmann, his name doesn't resonate with general audiences. Yet his role in Holocaust and Nazi terror was enormous. He commanded the largest Nazi police force. His administrative work enabled mass murder across occupied Europe. His order to destroy Lidice became shorthand for Nazi barbarism. His obscurity reflects a broader problem in Holocaust remembrance. While we remember the few most notorious Nazis, thousands of perpetrators who made genocide possible remain unknown. Every mass murder requires not just a Hitler giving orders, but hundreds of Dalueges implementing those orders, thousands of officers carrying them out, and millions of ordinary citizens acquiescing or collaborating. Understanding genocide requires examining entire systems, not just individual monsters. The hanging of Kurt Daluege on that October morning in Prague ended one man's life, but couldn't end the legacy of his crimes. Lidice remains destroyed, its original location a memorial park where grass grows over mass graves. The 340 victims remain dead. The trauma inflicted on survivors echoed through generations. His execution delivered legal justice but couldn't deliver restoration or healing. October 24, 1946. At 6:17 a.m., Kurt Daluege, SS-Oberstgruppenführer and chief of the Ordnungspolizei, was pronounced dead by hanging in Pankrak prison, Prague. He was 49 years old. His execution closed the case against one of Nazi Germany's most significant but least remembered war criminals. His death came 17 months after Germany's surrender, 4 years after he ordered Lidice's destruction, and 11 years after he assumed command of forces that would murder millions. History has not been kind to Kurt Daluege's memory, nor should it be. He stands as an example of how bureaucratic competence, institutional authority, and ideological commitment combine to enable atrocity on industrial scale. His life demonstrates that genocide requires not just mad dictators, but efficient administrators willing to transform murderous ideology into operational reality. The villagers of Lidice received justice of sorts when Daluege hanged, but justice couldn't restore what was taken. 173 men and boys murdered in Barn, 82 children gassed at Chełmno, 184 women who endured Ravensbrück, most dying there. An entire village erased as if it never existed. The new Lidice, rebuilt after the war, stands as memorial and defiance, proof that communities murdered by hatred can be reborn, though never truly restored. If you found this history compelling, this channel has dozens more documented accounts from World War II's darkest chapters. We don't sanitize history or look away from uncomfortable truths. We examine how ordinary people became perpetrators, how victims endured unimaginable suffering, and how justice, imperfect as it may be, eventually caught some of the guilty. Hit that subscribe button, share this video with those who value historical truth, and drop a comment below. What aspect of World War II justice should we examine next? We read every suggestion. Until next time, remember that studying history's horrors isn't about entertainment. It's about understanding how civilized societies can descend into barbarism, how ordinary people can commit extraordinary evil, and what we must do to prevent history from repeating its darkest chapters. The executed are gone, but their crimes and our responsibility to remember remain.